The boxes smelled like dust and dried tape. That's the first thing I remember about the apartment in Portland. Not the way the late afternoon sun slanted through the big bay window, or the faint scent of lemon cleaner left by the landlord. Just the smell of my own packed-up life. It was supposed to be a new start. 26, a real graphic design job, with a salary and benefits and a whole city I didn't know. The loneliness was part of the appeal, I think, a blank page. My apartment was on the ground floor of a converted two-story house. It was cozy, maybe a bit small, but the window looked out onto a shared patch of garden where rose bushes grew wild and tangled. It felt safe. I spent the first 2 days in a blur of unpacking, arranging furniture, and discovering the quirks of the place. The way the faucet in the bathroom sink dripped exactly 3 times after you turned it off. The loose floorboard near the kitchen that groaned whenever I stepped on it. Normal old building sounds. On the 3rd day, while wrestling a heavy box of books through the front door, one of the flaps gave way. Hardcovers spilled onto the concrete stoop with a series of dull thuds. "Need a hand with that?" The voice made me jump. I looked up to see a man standing on the porch of the house directly opposite. He was probably in his early 30s, lean, with an easy smile and dark, kind-looking eyes. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He didn't wait for an answer, just jogged across the narrow street. "I'm David," he said, already stooping to gather the scattered books. "Your new neighbor." "Sarah," I managed, feeling a stupid flush creep up my neck. "Thanks, I almost had it." "The last box is always the worst," he said, his smile widening. It was a nice smile, genuine. He stacked the books neatly and handed them to me, then lifted the now much lighter box with one hand. "Where do you want this?" He helped me carry the last few things inside. We didn't talk much, just exchanged the usual pleasantries. He was a freelance programmer, worked from home, had lived here for about 5 years. He was the only person who'd said more than a quick hello to me. When he left, he paused in the doorway. "Hey, if you need anything, directions, recommendations for a good coffee shop, whatever, just ask. It can be tough moving to a new place." I thanked him, and for the first time since I'd arrived, the apartment felt a little less empty. The whispers started about a week later. It's hard to even call them whispers. At first, it was just a sound, a low, indistinct murmur that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. I'd be lying in bed, the whole city hushed outside, and I'd hear it. So faint, it was on the very edge of hearing. I told myself it was the pipes, or maybe the people in the apartment upstairs, though I never heard footsteps or music, just this low, rhythmic hum, like a conversation happening rooms away, muffled by insulation and plaster. It wasn't scary, it was just there. I'd fall asleep to it. Then came the little things, the things that make you question your own mind. I'm meticulous. I have a certain way of doing things. My keys go on the second hook from the left on the rack by the door. Always. One morning, they were on the far right hook. I stared at them for a full minute, trying to remember putting them there. I couldn't. But it was just a hook. I must have been tired when I came in the night before. I brushed it off. A few days later, it was a book on my coffee table, a collection of short stories I'd been reading. I had left the bookmark on page 84. When I picked it up, it was on page 91. I absolutely knew I hadn't read past page 84. But what was the alternative? That the book had decided to turn its own pages? I laughed, a short, nervous sound in the quiet apartment. The stress of the new job was clearly getting to me. I was becoming forgetful.
The pen on my desk, which I had lined up perfectly parallel to the edge of my notepad, was now sitting at a slight angle. The salt shaker on the kitchen counter was an inch to the left of the pepper. These were nothing. They were tiny, meaningless details that a normal person wouldn't even register. But my life was a series of these details, of carefully curated order. And the order was being gently disturbed. It felt like a glitch in reality, a skipped frame in a film. You see it, but you convince yourself you didn't.
I mentioned the sounds to my landlord, Mr. Henderson, when I saw him trimming the rose bushes one Saturday. I tried to make it sound casual. "This old house sure has a lot of personality," I said, forcing a smile. "The walls are always talking." He chuckled, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a canvas glove. "Ah, that's just the plumbing. She's an old girl. All kinds of groans and sighs. You get used to it." He snipped a dead rose from its stem and gave me a dismissive, fatherly smile before turning back to his work. End of conversation. I felt foolish for even bringing it up. It kept happening. The displaced objects, the murmuring in the walls that sometimes, late at night, almost sounded like it was forming words before dissolving back into static. I started to feel a constant low-grade hum of anxiety. Was I sleeping badly? Was I so overworked that my brain was misfiring? The isolation wasn't helping. I had work acquaintances, but no friends yet. No one to call and say, "The craziest thing happened." One afternoon, I was checking my mail, pulling out a stack of bills and junk mail, when David walked up to his own mailbox across the street. He gave me a wave. "Settling in all right?" he called out. "Yeah, mostly," I said, trying to sound cheerful. He must have seen something in my face. He crossed the street, his expression shifting from casual friendliness to genuine concern. "You sure? You look a little tired." I don't know why I told him. Maybe it was because he was the only person who had shown me any real kindness. Maybe I was just desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't going crazy. "It's going to sound stupid," I started, my voice lower than I intended. "Try me," he said, leaning against the fence post. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was just listening. So I told him about the whispers that weren't really whispers, about the keys and the book and the salt shaker. I felt my cheeks heat up as the words came out, hearing how insane it all sounded. I expected him to laugh or give me the same polite dismissal as the landlord. But he didn't. He just nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on mine. He listened until I was finished, the silence stretching for a moment. "Moving to a new place can mess with your head," he said, his voice soft. "Your senses are on high alert. You notice every little sound, every shadow. But," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I believe you." 3 words, that's all it was. I believe you. The relief that washed over me was so intense it almost made my knees weak. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been holding until it suddenly vanished. Someone believed me. I wasn't losing my mind. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "Don't mention it," he said, with that easy smile. "Probably just the house settling, like your landlord said, but it's still unsettling. Just know you're not imagining things." He became my anchor after that. We'd chat when we saw each other outside. He gave me a great recommendation for a Thai restaurant. He was just a good guy, a normal, stable presence in the midst of the growing strangeness of my new life, which made the night of the tapping so much worse. It was a Tuesday. I was working late, trying to finish a logo design for a client. The apartment was completely silent, except for the click of my mouse and the low hum of my laptop. It was almost 1 in the morning. Rain had started to fall an hour earlier, a soft, steady drumming on the roof. I was focused, in that state of creative flow where the rest of the world fades away. And then, in my peripheral vision, something moved. Outside the big front window, it was a shadow, a shape darker than the night that passed across the glass in a swift, fluid motion. It wasn't a branch swaying in the wind. The movement was too deliberate. It was the distinct silhouette of a person, gone in an instant. My heart hammered against my ribs. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me, cold and sharp. I froze, my hand hovering over the mouse. My breath caught in my throat. It's just a trick of the light, someone walking their dog late, a reflection. My brain scrambled for a logical explanation, for anything that would make sense. I sat there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity, staring at the window. Nothing. Just the dark glass reflecting my own pale, wide-eyed face and the warm light of my living room. The rain pattered softly. The floorboards didn't groan.
Then, tap. A single, sharp sound. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't the sound of a tree branch hitting the glass. It was a dry, percussive sound, like a fingernail or a small stone being deliberately rapped against the very center of the window pane. It was loud enough to be unmistakable, but quiet enough to be terrifyingly intimate. I didn't scream. The sound that came out of my throat was a choked gasp. In one motion, I shoved my chair back and scrambled to my feet, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. I lunged for the light switch, plunging the room into darkness. My whole body was shaking. I crept toward the window, my back pressed against the wall. I peered through the edge of the curtain. The street outside was empty. The rain slicked the asphalt, making the orange glow of the single streetlight shimmer on the wet pavement. David's house across the street was dark. No one was on the sidewalk. No car was passing. The small patch of lawn in front of my apartment was completely, utterly vacant. I stood there for a long time, hidden in the dark of my own home, my eyes scanning the empty street. There was nothing there, absolutely nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I knew it with a certainty that chilled me deeper than the night air. Even though I couldn't see them, someone was still out there, watching me. The phone rang before my alarm. That's never a good sign. The screen glowed with a name I associated only with spreadsheets and deadlines, Mr. Davies, my boss. Sarah, his voice was tight, stripped of all its usual corporate politeness. I need you to come in, now. There was no room for questions. I threw on the first clothes I could find, my mind racing. What could be so urgent? Had I missed a deadline? I was sure I hadn't. The tapping on the window from the night before still had my nerves frayed, and I'd slept in fits, jolting awake at every creak of the old house. The office was quiet when I arrived, but it was a heavy, watchful quiet. The few colleagues who were in already gave me strange looks. Not hostile, but assessing. Like a puzzle they were trying to solve. Mr. Davies called me into his glass-walled office before I could even set my bag down. "Close the door," he said. He was gesturing to an email on his monitor. Can you explain this? I leaned in. The email was addressed to our firm's biggest client, the one I was designing the new campaign for. The subject line was a jumble of random characters. The body of the email was worse. It was a solid block of text, thousands of words, all complete gibberish. It looked like someone had just mashed their hands on the keyboard for 10 minutes straight. Beneath it all was my email signature, sent from my account. Timestamp, 2:04 a.m. I didn't send this, I said. The words felt stupid and hollow as they left my mouth. It came from your corporate account, Sarah, sent from your IP address? At 2 in the morning? He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the screen, as if it were a crime scene. Our client is, to put it mildly, confused and concerned. They think it's some kind of cryptic joke, or that we've been hacked. Which brings me to IT. He made a call. A young man named Ben from the IT department came in, looking uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He explained it in flat, technical terms. The email was sent from my laptop. The logs show it. There was no evidence of a remote breach, no Trojan, no malware they could detect. As far as their systems are concerned, someone with my password sat at my laptop at 2:04 a.m. and sent a garbage email to our most important client. I was asleep, I insisted, my voice starting to shake. I swear, I went to bed around midnight. Mr. Davies just stared at me. Ben from IT just stared at his shoes. There was nothing else to say. The evidence was digital, absolute, and it said I was a liar. "Fix it," Mr. Davies said finally, his voice like gravel, "and figure out what the hell is doing on with you." I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, fielding a panicked call from the client, drafting apologies, enduring the sudden silence that fell over the communal kitchen whenever I walked in. The whispers were just on the edge of my hearing, the same way they were in the walls of my apartment. Stress. Heard she was having problems. Unprofessional.
I felt a phantom itch between my shoulder blades, the feeling of being watched by a dozen pairs of eyes. I was isolated, adrift in a sea of cubicles. I was staring blankly at my screen, trying to summon the creative energy to work, when a knock came at my apartment door later that afternoon. I'd come home for lunch just to get away from the office, but I hadn't been able to eat. Through the peephole, I saw David. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I opened the door. "Rough morning?" he asked gently. His smile was hesitant, full of concern. It was a stark contrast to the suspicious glares I'd been facing all day. I must have looked as bad as I felt, because his expression softened even more. "Here," he said, handing me one of the cups. "You look like you need this." The warmth of the cup seeped into my cold hands. I hadn't realized I was shaking. I stepped back to let him in, and the story just tumbled out of me. The email, the boss, the IT report, the looks from my coworkers. I told him everything, my voice cracking with a frustration so deep it felt like grief. I expected him to look at me with that same flicker of doubt I'd seen in everyone else's eyes. Instead, he just listened, nodding.
When I was done, a pathetic, watery silence hanging in the air, he looked right at me. "I know you'd never do that," he said. The certainty in his voice was an anchor. "You're the most meticulous person I've ever met. It doesn't make sense." The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming, that I had to sit down. Tears I hadn't even known were there pricked at the corners of my eyes. He just sat on the arm of the sofa, letting me pull myself together, a quiet, solid presence in the chaos of my life. He was the only thing that felt real, the only person who saw me instead of the liability I'd become. "It's getting weird, David," I whispered, staring into the coffee. "The tapping last night, now this. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're just overwhelmed, and someone is messing with you." The thought was terrifying, but it was better than the alternative. Better than believing my own brain was betraying me. We talked for a little while longer, and by the time he left, a small piece of my sanity felt like it had been glued back into place. I tried to work for another hour, but my focus was shot. The apartment felt too quiet. I stood up, needing a distraction. "Jasper," I called out, heading for the kitchen. "Here, kitty kitty." Usually that was all it took. A rustle of the treat bag, and he'd come trotting out from whatever sunbeam he'd been sleeping in, his little bell jingling. But there was no jingle, no answering meow. "Jasper?" I checked his favorite spot on the sofa, the worn patch on the rug by the window, under my bed, behind the curtains. A knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. He was always here. He was strictly an indoor cat. I searched the small apartment from top to bottom. I looked in closets, in the laundry basket, inside the empty kitchen cabinets. Nothing. The silence was absolute. My calls became more frantic, my voice getting higher with each repetition of his name. My heart started to pound in a new, sickening rhythm. Then I saw it. The window in my bedroom, the one I locked every single night, the one I checked this morning before I left in a panic. It was open. Not wide, just pushed up a few inches from the bottom. Just enough for a cat to slip through. No, I checked it. I know I did. I have a routine. I always check the windows. The thought repeated in my head, a frantic mantra against a rising tide of ice-water dread. A sob escaped my throat. I ran outside, my mind a blur. I stumbled through the shared garden, calling his name until my throat was raw. I walked up and down the street, peering under cars, into overgrown bushes. The quiet suburban street suddenly felt vast and dangerous. "Sarah, what's wrong?" It was David. He was coming out of his house, a gym bag slung over his shoulder. He saw my face and dropped the bag on his lawn. "It's my cat, Jasper. He's gone. The window, it was open." He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask if I was sure I had closed it. He just saw my panic and acted. "Okay," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Okay, we'll find him. He can't have gone far. Let's make some flyers. I have a printer." For the next 2 hours, he was my rock.
He designed a simple lost cat flyer with Jasper's picture, printed 50 copies, and found a staple gun. We walked the neighborhood together, block by block, tacking the flyers to telephone poles and community notice boards. He spoke to neighbors I'd never seen before, asking them to check their garages and sheds. He did it all with a quiet efficiency that kept my own spiraling panic at bay. We searched until the sun went down and the streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. My hope dwindled with the light. The neighborhood fell silent again. No jingle of a bell, no answering meow to my desperate calls. We finally gave up and sat on the concrete steps of my front porch. I was completely drained, a hollowed-out shell of a person. My job was a mess, my cat was gone, my home felt violated. "He'll come back," David said softly, sitting beside me in the dark. "He's probably just scared, hiding somewhere. He'll get hungry and come home." I nodded, unable to speak. I was just so grateful he was there. I couldn't have done it alone. He was the only good thing that had happened in a day full of nightmares. But as I sat there, leaning my head back against the cool wood of the doorframe, that feeling returned. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The same feeling I'd had the night before, staring out at the empty street. It was the distinct, undeniable feeling of being watched. I scanned the houses across the street. Dark windows stared back like vacant eyes. A curtain in an upstairs window seemed to twitch, but it could have been a draft. It could have been anything. It could have been nothing. My imagination working overtime. But the feeling was real. A cold, heavy pressure. Someone, somewhere in the suffocating quiet of this peaceful neighborhood, was watching us from the darkness. The next morning, I woke up on the sofa, still in yesterday's clothes. The first thing I felt was the hollow ache of Jasper's absence. The silence in the apartment was a living thing. I forced myself up, my body stiff, my mind clouded with a dull dread. As I reached the front door to check the porch one more time, just in case, I saw it. A small, rectangular package was sitting on the doormat. It was wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with simple twine. There was no postage, no return address. It had been hand-delivered. My name, Sarah, was written on top in neat, careful cursive. My breath caught in my throat. I picked it up. It weighed almost nothing. My fingers were numb as I worked at the twine. It was tied in a simple, neat bow. Someone had taken their time. The brown paper tore easily, revealing a small white box, the kind jewelry comes in. For a wild, insane second, I thought maybe it was an apology gift from work. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of white cotton, was Jasper's collar. It was a simple blue nylon strap with a tiny silver bell. The nylon was dark and stiff, caked with drying mud. Specks of dirt clung to the little bell, silencing it. There was no note, no threat, just the collar, just the silence of that little bell. The air left my lungs in a single, painful rush. I sank down to the floor, my back against the door, the small box held in my hands like some terrible relic. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, tracing the outline of the buckle with my thumb, feeling the grit of the dried earth. He wouldn't have taken it off. He couldn't. It meant someone else did. Someone had touched him. Someone had taken his collar and brought it back here, to me. It felt like an hour passed before I could move. My legs were pins and needles. I stood up, went to the kitchen phone, and dialed 911. My voice, when it came, sounded strange and distant, like it was coming from someone else. The two officers who arrived were professional, I'll give them that. They didn't smile, but they didn't look at me like I was crazy either. Not at first.
They looked at the box, at the muddy collar, at the lack of a forced entry. They walked through the apartment. One of them, the older one with a gray mustache, noted the open bedroom window. "You're sure you locked it?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes," I said, "I'm positive. I check it every night." He nodded slowly, sharing a look with his younger partner. It was a look I was beginning to know well. It was the look the IT guy gave me. The look my boss gave me.
It said, "Are you sure, though?" "Ma'am," the older officer said, his voice gentle but firm. "What you have here is disturbing. It's likely a malicious prank. Someone in the neighborhood, maybe some kids, found your cat's collar and thought it'd be funny. They left it on my doorstep. They had to come onto my property." "Yes, they did. But there's no direct threat here. No note, no damage. There's not much we can do. There's nothing to investigate." His partner chimed in. "We'll file a report. We'll ask around a bit. Best advice we can give you is to be extra careful. Double-check your locks. Maybe consider a deadbolt." They were gone 10 minutes later. I stood in the doorway, watching their car pull away until it was just a dot of white in the distance. A prank. It felt like my entire life was being dismantled, and to them, it was just a prank. I felt a surge of helpless anger, so intense it made my hands shake. I closed the door, slid the chain across, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. Alone. I was completely alone in this. A light knock came a few minutes later. I jumped, my heart a frantic bird in my ribs. Through the peephole, I saw David's concerned face. I unchained the door and opened it. He took one look at me and stepped inside, his expression hardening. "What happened? Are you okay? I saw the police car." I just pointed to the little white box still on the coffee table. He walked over, looked inside, and his jaw tightened. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he looked back at me, his eyes filled with a fury that mirrored my own. "What did they say?" he asked, his voice low. "They said it was a prank," I whispered. "They said there's nothing they can do." "Nothing they can do?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Someone is terrorizing you and there's nothing they can do? That's bullshit." And then I finally broke. The tears I'd been holding back streamed down my face in hot, silent tracks. He was across the room in 2 strides, pulling me into a hug. It wasn't gentle, it was firm, protective. I buried my face in his shoulder and just let go, sobbing for my lost cat, for my lost job, for the complete and utter loss of control over my own life. He just stood there, holding me, a solid, unmoving presence in the storm. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he murmured into my hair. "I'm so sorry." We stood like that for a long time. When I finally pulled back, wiping my eyes, he was still looking at me with that fierce, protective anger. He was the only person who believed me, the only one who saw this wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. That afternoon, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello? Is this Sarah Jenkins?" A crisp, professional voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Brenda from Pacific West Bank's fraud department. We're calling about some unusual activity on your checking account this morning." My blood ran cold. What activity? There were 3 cash withdrawals made from an ATM in Gresham starting at 9:15 a.m. The withdrawals were for the maximum daily limit, effectively emptying the account. Gresham was 20 miles away. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's impossible. I've been here. I've been home all day." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of typing. "Well, ma'am, the withdrawals were made with your debit card and the correct PIN. I can assure you the transactions are valid." "No, you don't understand." My voice was rising, hysterical.
My card is in my wallet, right here. Someone is doing this. Someone sent me a thing, my cat's collar. The police were just here. Someone is messing with me. Another pause, longer this time. Miss Jenkins, Brenda said, her voice now coolly polite, clinical. The ATM has a security camera. We can confirm that the person who made the withdrawals matches your general description. The world tilted. What? We'll open an investigation, of course. It can take several weeks. In the meantime, we've frozen the account to prevent further. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, Brenda's voice a tinny, distant squawk. I stumbled to my purse, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open it. There it was, my wallet, and inside, tucked into its slot, was my debit card. It was impossible. None of it was possible. The gibberish email, the open window, the package, and now this.
A ghost of me, walking around, living a secret life, ruining my real one. I needed to talk to someone who knew me, someone who knew I wasn't this person. I picked up the phone and called my mom. I told her everything, the words spilling out in a panicked, incoherent flood. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the line. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the beating of my own heart. "Oh, honey," she finally said, her voice soft and full of a familiar, worried tenderness. "It sounds like you're under a lot of stress. That new job, the move, it's a lot to handle all at once." "Mom, did you hear me? Someone took all my money. They know my PIN." "I know, sweetie, I know. But sometimes, when we're exhausted, we forget things. Maybe you wrote the number down somewhere. Are you getting enough sleep? Maybe you just need to take a little break. Come home for a weekend. Rest." She didn't believe me. She was hearing breakdown, not crime. She was worried about my mental health, not my physical safety. I was describing a monster at my door, and she was suggesting a cup of tea and a good night's sleep. A chasm opened up between us right there over the phone line. "I have to go, Mom," I said, my voice flat. I hung up before she could say anything else. I was sitting on the sofa, staring at nothing, when David knocked again. He must have seen my face crumble when I opened the door. "What now?" he asked, his own face a mask of dread. I told him about the bank, about my mom, about the security camera. I told him I had no money, not for rent, not for food, nothing. I was completely broken. He listened, his expression growing darker with every word. He didn't doubt me for a second. When I finished, he just said, "Don't move." He went back across to his house and returned a minute later. He pressed a thick wad of cash into my hand. It was a bundle of 20s and 50s held together with a rubber band. "No, David, I can't." "Yes, you can," he said, closing my fingers over the bills. "Take it, pay your rent, buy groceries. We'll sort this out. You can pay me back whenever. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're safe." I stared down at the money in my hand. It felt heavy. It felt wrong. Accepting it was an admission of defeat, an admission that I couldn't take care of myself anymore, an admission that he was the only one I had left to depend on. His eyes were looking at me, brimming with what I thought was sincere care. It felt like salvation. Looking back now, I see it for what it was, not care. It was satisfaction. The quiet, deep satisfaction of a predator cornering its prey. That night, I couldn't sleep. The money sat on my kitchen counter, a monument to my own helplessness. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt through my body.
The feeling of being watched was constant now, a physical pressure on my skin. I couldn't trust the police, I couldn't trust my family. I couldn't even trust my own reflection anymore. I sat in the dark, my laptop open, the screen a lone bright square in the gloom. I wasn't working. I wasn't trying to distract myself. I was searching. Smallest spy camera. Hidden security cam with motion detection. Camera disguised as a phone charger. Camera disguised as a smoke detector. Camera small enough to hide in the soil of a potted plant. I had to know. I had to see what was happening in my own home when I wasn't looking. Was I sleepwalking? Was I losing my mind? Or was someone coming in? There was only one way to find out. My finger hovered over the mouse. The thought was terrifying. What if I found nothing? What would that say about me? But what if I found something? I clicked Confirm Purchase. The package arrived 2 days later, small, light, an Amazon Prime smile on the side of the box. I used my house key to slice the tape, my movement slow, deliberate. Inside, cushioned by air packs, was another box. The camera was tiny, a perfect black cube no bigger than a sugar cube, with a lens like a pinprick. The instructions were simple. I plugged it into a USB charger to power it on, set it up on the Wi-Fi, and then watched the live feed on my phone. The picture was surprisingly clear. I could see the whole living room, the front door, the kitchen counter beyond. I found the perfect spot for it. A large leafy ficus plant sat in the corner, a housewarming gift from my parents.
I nestled the tiny cube deep within the leaves, angled just right, its little black eye staring out from the artificial jungle. It was practically invisible. I felt a small, bitter sense of accomplishment. I was taking back a sliver of control. I spent the evening in a state of suspended animation. I made myself dinner but barely touched it. I tried to watch a show, but the dialogue was just noise. My eyes kept darting between the television screen and my phone, which I'd propped up on the coffee table. The live feed a silent, unblinking window into my own home. It was insane. I was sitting on my couch watching a video of myself sitting on my couch. The hours crawled by. Nothing happened. The camera showed an empty, silent room. Maybe my mom was right. Maybe I was just exhausted. Maybe I was cracking under the pressure. The thought offered a strange, sick kind of comfort. Around 10, I decided to take a shower. I needed the steam, the sound of the water, something to wash away the feeling of being constantly watched. I left the phone on the nightstand in my bedroom. I turned the water on as hot as I could stand it and stepped in, letting it beat down on my shoulders. I closed my eyes. For a few minutes there was nothing but the roar and the heat. I turned off the water and stood in the sudden quiet, dripping onto the mat. And then I heard it. A soft vibration from the bedroom. My phone. A notification. My heart didn't just beat faster. It stopped. Stone cold, dead in my chest for a single, infinite second before hammering back to life. My hands were shaking as I wrapped a towel around myself. I walked into the bedroom, my bare feet silent on the wood floor. The screen was lit up. A single banner across the top. Motion detected in living room. I stood frozen, staring at the words. Motion detected in living room. But I was here, in the back of the apartment, alone. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My breath came in shallow, useless little gasps. It's the cat, I thought.
A desperate, stupid fragment of hope. A neighbor's cat got in through the window again. But I'd checked the window. I had checked it 3 times before getting into the shower. My thumb hovered over the screen. I had to know. I had to see. I tapped the notification. The app opened, loading the recorded clip. The timestamp was 2 minutes ago. The video was grainy in the low light, the only illumination coming from the small lamp I'd left on. The room was empty, just as I'd left it. For a second, relief washed over me. A false alarm. A glitch. Then the front door began to move. It didn't swing open. It moved slowly, silently, gliding inwards with a horrifying smoothness. There was no sound of a lock being forced, no splintering wood, just a deliberate, practiced opening. A figure stepped inside. David. He didn't look around furtively. He didn't act like an intruder. He moved with a quiet ownership, like he was walking into his own house after a long day. He closed the door behind him with the same unnerving silence. He didn't glance towards the back of the apartment, towards my bedroom or the bathroom where the shower had just been running. It was as if he knew exactly where I was, as if it didn't matter. He wasn't there to steal anything. He walked past the television, past my laptop on the coffee table. He went straight to the kitchen counter, to the large glass water dispenser I used every day. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled something out, something small. In the grainy footage, it was just a pale, indistinct shape between his thumb and forefinger. He unscrewed the lid of the dispenser, dropped the object in, and I saw it. A tiny white pill. It hit the water with a barely perceptible splash, then began to dissolve, a faint, cloudy trail swirling downwards before disappearing completely. The water became clear again, as if nothing had happened. He screwed the lid back on. He wiped the counter with the sleeve of his jacket, a single, meticulous motion. And then he turned and walked back to the door, let himself out, and closed it. I heard the sound then, even through the phone's cheap speaker. A tiny click. The deadbolt. He'd locked it from the outside. He had a key. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the spot where it had fallen, my mind a blank, roaring void. The whispers in the walls. The book turned to a new page.
The email. Jasper's collar. The woman at the ATM who looked just like me, wearing clothes I didn't own. The money he had so graciously, so protectively pressed into my hand. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't me losing my mind. It was a project. It was a script, and I was the star. A cold certainty settled over me, pushing aside the panic. It was a terrible, clarifying lucidity. Every caring look, every supportive word, every hug, it was all a lie. He wasn't the anchor in my storm. He was the storm. I became aware of a metallic taste in my mouth, a slight fuzziness at the edge of my vision. The water. I'd had a huge glass right before my shower, from the dispenser. My stomach turned. How many times had he done this? How many tiny, clowny things had I already consumed? Was that what the whispers were? A sound from outside pulled me from the spiral. A soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel path leading to my front door. He was coming back.
My first instinct was to dial 911. My phone was right there. But the thought died before it could fully form. I saw it play out in my head. The confused operator, my panicked, drugged voice trying to explain. The minutes it would take for them to arrive. Long before any sirens would reach this quiet street, he would be at the door. He would hear me. He would know that I knew. The call wouldn't save me. It would only get me killed faster. No police. No one was coming to help me. It was just me. I moved. The towel dropped to the floor. I didn't register the cold. Adrenaline was afire in my veins. I pulled on the sweatpants and t-shirt I'd left on the bed. My movements were jerky, but they had purpose. I grabbed my purse from the chair, dug inside, my fingers closing around the cold cylinder of the pepper spray. Then I went to the kitchen. I slid open the knife block. My hand went past the paring knives, the bread knife. I grabbed the chef's knife, 8 inches of German steel. It felt heavy, solid, real. I went to the living room lamp and switched it off. The apartment plunged into near-total darkness. The only light a pale gray filtering through the windows from the streetlights outside. My hiding spot was obvious. The oversized armchair in the corner, the one I'd bought from a second-hand store. It was big, bulky. It faced away from the door. I squeezed myself into the narrow space between the back of the chair and the wall, drawing my knees to my chest. I held the pepper spray in my left hand, the knife in my right, the blade resting against my thigh. I tried to control my breathing, forcing the air in and out in slow, measured drags. In and out. The house was silent. I could hear the thumping of my own blood in my ears. It was the only sound in the world. And then the sound of a key sliding into the lock. It turned with a soft, oily click. The door opened. His silhouette filled the frame. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He stood there for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. I could see the outline of his shoulders, the shape of his head. He was so calm. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice a low, gentle murmur. The same voice he used when he found me crying. The same voice that promised to help me. "Sarah, you home? I heard a weird noise. Just wanted to check if you're okay." He took a step into the room, then another. He was moving towards the armchair, towards me. The floorboards creaked faintly under his weight. My muscles coiled, tight as springs. My world had shrunk to this dark space, the smell of dust and old fabric, the cold steel in my hands. 3 more steps. 2. His shadow fell over me, a blanket of darkness. Now. I exploded out of the space, a single silent scream trapped in my throat. I was on my feet, lunging. I jammed my thumb down on the pepper spray. A thick orange stream shot out, hitting him square in the face. The sound he made was nothing I have ever heard before. It was a choked, guttural shriek of pure agony and shock. He clawed at his eyes, stumbling backward. What the? I didn't give him time to think. I didn't give myself time to think. I swung the knife. It was a clumsy, wild arc, and he threw up an arm, the blade slicing through his jacket sleeve and into his forearm. He screamed again, a higher, more frantic pitch this time. He was stronger than me, bigger, even blinded. He was dangerous. He lunged forward blindly, his hands grabbing for me.
His fingers brushed my shirt. I scrambled back, my bare feet slipping on the rug. The room was a chaos of stumbling bodies and ragged, desperate breaths. He was gasping, trying to clear his eyes, enraged. He swung a fist that connected with my shoulder, sending a shock of pain down my arm. I nearly dropped the knife, but he couldn't see. That was my only advantage. He lunged again, and I sidestepped, putting all my weight, all my terror, all my rage into one desperate shove. I pushed him towards the center of the room. He tripped over the leg of the low glass coffee table. For a heart-stopping moment, he teetered there, off balance. I shoved again, with everything I had left. The sound of the glass shattering was like a gunshot in the small apartment, a deafening, crystalline explosion. He went down with it, crying out as shards of glass bit into him. That was my chance. I didn't look back. I ran. I yanked the front door open and burst out into the cold night air, not stopping until my bare feet hit the wet grass of the lawn. I opened my mouth and I screamed. It wasn't a call for help. It was just a raw, animal noise torn from the deepest part of me. A sudden, blinding light washed over me. A car was pulling into the driveway next door. The engine cut, and the headlights stayed on, pinning me in their glare. A wild-eyed woman in sweatpants, barefoot on the lawn, screaming at the sky. A car door opened. Then, from far away, I heard it. A faint, rising siren. It grew louder, closer, splitting the night in two. I sank to my knees on the damp grass, the chef's knife falling from my hand. The wail of the sirens was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Later, they told me what they found. After they had taken him away, his face a swollen, weeping mess, wrists cuffed behind his back. After the paramedics had checked me over. They got a warrant for his house. At first, it was just a house. Neat, organized, nothing out of place. It was in the basement that they found it. Behind a newly built drywall panel, they found a door. It was soundproofed. Inside, there was no shrine to me. There was a long wall, and on it, tacked up in neat rows, were driver's licenses, student IDs, social security cards, little personal things, a silver locket, a single earring, a concert ticket stub. There were dozens of them. Dozens of women from Oregon, from Washington, from California. Next to each woman's collection was a small, labeled Ziploc bag containing a set of house keys and a notebook. Each notebook detailed the same meticulous, cruel script. The whispers, the gaslighting, the isolation, the final, complete dependency. Mine was the newest one, the pages still crisp. That wasn't the worst of it. Against the far wall was a large, industrial chest freezer. An officer lifted the heavy lid. Inside, stacked and vacuum-sealed in clear plastic bags, were clothes. A red and white striped shirt belonging to a girl from Boise. A pair of worn jeans that matched the photo of a woman from Seattle. A simple gray jacket and a dark blue beanie. The exact outfit the security camera had recorded when a woman who looked just like me had calmly, methodically emptied my entire life from a bank 20 miles away.